The sun is low over the water, and for a moment the fleet looks like something out of scripture. Hundreds of ships, thousands of shields catching the light, red crosses stitched onto sails that were never meant to sail this far north. This is supposed to be an army on its way to save Jerusalem. It is not going to Jerusalem. Somewhere behind these ships, the holy city is still waiting for an army that swore in front of a pope to come and take it back. It will keep waiting long after this story ends. Ahead of the fleet is a different skyline entirely, domes, towers, a wall system so massive that no army in Europe has ever broken it. Constantinople, the richest city in the Christian world, protected by the strongest fortifications anyone alive has ever seen. And the men crowding these decks are not enemies of Christ. They are crusaders, men who took vows, sewed crosses onto their own chests, and left homes in France and Flanders and Italy to die, if necessary, for their faith. Behind those walls are also Christians. Different language, different rite, same God. That is the part that should stop you cold. Two Christian forces, one about to attack the other, and neither one started this war intending to fight it. So, how does an army raised to defend Christendom end up burning one of its greatest cities to the ground? The answer is not a single betrayal. It is not one villain making one evil choice behind closed doors. It is a chain, a debt here, a compromise there, a promise that sounds too good to check carefully. And each link makes the next one just a little easier to accept. By the time anyone in this fleet fully understands what they have become, it is already too late to turn back. To understand how it got this far, you have to go back 3 years, to the moment a pope in Rome decided the Holy Land needed saving one more time, and a business deal in Venice quietly set the whole disaster in motion. 14 years earlier, Jerusalem had fallen, not to fire and slaughter this time, but to negotiation. The Sultan Saladin took the city, and Christian Europe felt the loss like a wound that would not close. Kings tried to take it back. They failed. By the time Pope Innocent III rises to the papal throne, Jerusalem is still in Muslim hands, and he decides the West needs to try again. But this crusade is supposed to be smarter than the last one. Instead of marching straight into the desert toward Jerusalem, where earlier crusades had bled out from heat, disease, and impossible supply lines, the plan is to strike at Egypt first. Egypt is the economic engine of the region. Control it, the thinking goes. And Jerusalem becomes easier to hold once you take it. It is a good strategy, on paper. But there's a problem no sword can solve. You cannot march an army to Egypt. You have to sail it there. And in the year 1201, there is only one power in Europe, with a fleet large enough to move tens of thousands of soldiers across the sea. Venice. The Republic of Venice is not a kingdom. It is closer to a corporation with a navy, ruled by merchants, run on contracts, and led at this moment by a man named Enrico Dandolo. Dandolo is old. He is also, by most accounts, nearly blind, and he is one of the sharpest political operators in Europe. The Crusader envoys sit down with Dandolo and negotiate what is essentially a shipping contract. Venice agrees to build and crew an enormous fleet, enough to carry roughly 33,000 men and 4,500 horses, in exchange for a fixed price in silver paid up front before a single ship leaves the harbor. Here's the domain term worth knowing. This is a transport contract, a fixed commercial deal, the same kind of arrangement you'd use to move cargo, except the cargo here is an army, and the payment is calculated on numbers that haven't shown up yet. Venice keeps its end of the bargain completely. Shipyards work for over a year. An entire fleet gets built from nothing, just for this expedition. Then the crusaders start arriving at the meeting point, a sandy stretch of Venetian territory called the Lido, and the numbers stop matching. Instead of 33,000 men, barely a third of that shows up. Some lords take separate routes to the Holy Land entirely, avoiding Venice altogether. Others simply don't come. The fleet Venice built sits nearly empty in the harbor. Tents go up on the Lido, and the crusaders wait. You can feel where this goes. Fewer men means less money raised through the usual channel. Each knight and soldier was supposed to contribute toward the total cost. With a third of the army, there is only a fraction of the payment. The crusaders count what they have. It isn't close. Venice, understandably, wants what it was promised. It built the ships. It paid the labor. It is owed silver it will never see if this expedition simply disbands. So the camp on the Lido becomes something closer to a hostage situation than a staging ground. The crusaders can't sail without Venice's ships. Venice won't move without payment. And every week the army sits there, eating through supplies and morale. The debt gets more impossible to close. This is where the first compromise appears. Small, almost reasonable, easy to justify in the moment. Dandolo makes an offer. Venice will forgive part of the debt if the crusaders do one thing first: help Venice retake a rebellious port city on the Adriatic coast, a city called Zara. There's just one detail nobody wants to say out loud in that meeting. Zara is Catholic. Zara belongs to the King of Hungary, a fellow crusader, a fellow son of the Church. Attacking it means an army raised under the Pope's own banner, turning its swords on other Christians before it has fought a single battle against anyone else. Some knights refuse outright and go home rather than take part, but most of the army stays. The debt is real. The ships are the only way to the Holy Land. And Zara, they tell themselves, is just one city, a means to an end, not the mission itself. In November of 1202, the Crusader fleet lands at Zara. The city falls in under 2 weeks. When word reaches Rome, Pope Innocent III is furious. He excommunicates the entire expedition, the first crusade in history, condemned by its own pope before it even reaches the enemy it was sent to fight. Here's what matters more than the excommunication itself. Nobody in that camp set out to attack a Christian city. Every single person involved can point to a reasonable, practical, almost boring reason for what they did. Pay the debt, keep the fleet, reach the real target eventually. That is exactly how the next compromise, and the one after that, will get justified too. Pause here for a second, because it's worth naming what just happened. army raised to fight for Christendom has already sacked a Christian city, and it hasn't even left Europe yet. If a debt and a convenient argument were enough to point these swords at Zara, what happens the next time someone offers a solution that looks almost too good to refuse? If you're finding this chain of decisions as unsettling as I do, stick around, because the next offer on the table is the one that actually redirects this entire crusade. And it comes from a young man with a very good story and a debt of his own to settle. Before we get to him, if this kind of pattern, good intentions slowly bending under pressure until they break, is the kind of history you want more of, this channel exists for exactly that. Subscribing costs nothing, and it tells me you want more of these chains, traced start to finish. Now, back to the camp at Zara, where a stranger is about to arrive with an offer that will change the target of this crusade completely. The stranger's name is Alexios Angelos, and he is, in theory, a prince. His father, Isaac II, once sat on the Byzantine throne until his own brother blinded him and threw him in prison. A fairly standard method of removing a rival in Constantinople, where blinding a man was considered a merciful alternative to killing him. Young Alexios escaped the same fate, fled west, and has spent years wandering the courts of Europe, looking for someone willing to help him take his father's throne back. He finds the crusaders at exactly the right moment. They are broke, excommunicated, camped outside a city they weren't supposed to attack, and desperate for any way to make this expedition feel justified again. Alexios makes them an offer that solves every problem at once. Help me overthrow my uncle and restore my father to the Byzantine throne, he says, and I will pay off your entire debt to Venice. I will give you additional troops and ships for the real crusade to Egypt and Jerusalem. And I will bring the Byzantine Church back under the authority of Rome, healing a religious split that has lasted for 150 years. Money, manpower, a historic religious reunification, all from one military detour that, technically, still involves fighting fellow Christians, except this time the Crusaders can tell themselves it's a rescue mission instead of a conquest. Here's the part nobody in that camp stops to check carefully enough. Alexios doesn't actually have the authority to promise any of this. He isn't emperor. His father isn't emperor yet either. Everything he's offering depends on Byzantine subjects, people who have never met him, accepting him as their rightful ruler the moment he shows up with a foreign army at their gates. Doge Dandolo, meanwhile, has his own reasons to like this plan. Venice has old trading rivalries with Constantinople and doesn't mind seeing Byzantine politics destabilized in Venice's favor. Boniface of Montferrat, the Crusade's elected leader, backs the plan too. Between Venetian ambition and Crusader desperation, barely anyone argues against it. So the fleet that was supposed to sail for Egypt turns instead toward Constantinople. In June of 1203, Crusader ships appear outside the largest city in the Christian world. The Byzantines watch from their walls in confusion. These are not Muslim invaders. They're fellow Christians, arriving with a claimant nobody inside the city particularly wants. The first assault targets something specific, a massive chain stretched across the entrance to the harbor, known as the Golden Horn, meant to block any hostile fleet from entering. It is considered unbreakable. Venetian ships break it anyway. With the harbor open, Crusader forces storm sections of the wall, while the reigning emperor, Alexios's uncle, does something almost nobody expects. He panics, grabs what treasure he can carry, and flees the city in the night, abandoning the throne rather than fight for it. Just like that, the Crusaders' candidate is halfway to power. Isaac II, blind and half forgotten in his prison cell, is pulled out and restored as emperor. His son is crowned beside him as co-ruler, Alexios IV. For about a week, this looks like the whole gamble paid off. Then, Alexios IV actually has to produce the money he promised. The Byzantine treasury, drained by years of civil war and mismanagement, doesn't have anywhere near enough silver to cover what he swore to the Crusaders. So he starts stripping the one resource left in the city that's still worth something: the churches. Gold and silver icon covers get melted down. Church plate gets confiscated. Sacred objects that have sat untouched in Constantinople's churches for centuries are pulled apart for bullion, all to pay foreign soldiers camped outside the walls. Soldiers who are supposed to be the city's saviors. You can guess how that looks to the people actually living there. The rescue starts to feel like an occupation. Byzantine citizens, who initially tolerated Alexios IV as a return to legitimate rule, now watch him gut their churches to satisfy a debt to Latin Christians, most of them view as barely Christian at all. Riots break out. A great fire, possibly started by Crusader soldiers during a raid, burns through part of the city and destroys homes belonging to thousands of Constantinople's own residents. The man who was supposed to save the city is now the reason half of it hates him. And the Crusaders outside the walls are watching their entire justification for this detour: the payment, the promised troops, the religious reunification, evaporate in real time. By the start of the year 1204, Alexios IV is a man trapped between two furious groups. Outside the walls, Crusaders who haven't been paid what they were promised. Inside the walls, subjects who despise him for trying. He cannot satisfy both. He is about to lose the chance to satisfy either. Byzantine court politics have never been gentle with weak emperors. And a noble named Alexios Doukas, nicknamed Mortsouflos for his thick, joined eyebrows, decides the time has come to end this experiment. In January, he has Alexios IV arrested, imprisoned, and strangled. His blind father, Isaac, dies shortly after, likely from the shock and the conditions of his confinement. Mortsouflos crowns himself Alexios V, and his first move as emperor is to reject the entire arrangement his predecessor made. No more payments to the Crusaders, no religious union with Rome, no troops for a future crusade to Egypt. As far as the new emperor is concerned, the debt died with the man who signed it. Outside the walls, the Crusader leadership faces a decision that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Back when This was still technically a mission to save Jerusalem. They vote to take the city by force, not to install another puppet claimant, to conquer it outright. There is no clean way to say what this decision actually is. This is not a rescue anymore. This is not a debt collection anymore. This is an army that swore an oath to defend Christendom, preparing to break through the walls of the largest Christian city on earth and take it for themselves. In April of 1204, they attack. The first assault fails. The second doesn't. Crusader forces breach the sea walls near the Golden Horn, the same stretch of fortification the fleet had forced open the year before. And this time, there is no negotiation waiting on the other side. Just a city with nothing left to offer and nowhere left to retreat. What follows lasts 3 days. Soldiers move street to street through the wealthiest city in the Christian world, and they take everything that can be carried. Gold reliquaries, silver altar pieces, silk vestments. Byzantine chroniclers describe soldiers drinking wine out of sacred vessels inside the Hagia Sophia itself, tearing silver plating off the altar, putting a prostitute on the patriarch's throne as a joke that history has never let go of. Bronze horse statues get crated up and shipped to Venice, where they still stand today above the doors of St. Mark's Basilica. Somewhere in the smoke and the looting, an old detail closes a loop that's been open since the very first scene of this story. Jerusalem is still waiting. It was waiting when the fleet left Venice. It was waiting through Zara, through Alexios' promises, through the coronation, and the melted icons, and the coup. And it is waiting now, while the army that swore to reach it instead spends 3 days taking apart Constantinople instead. This crusade will never reach Jerusalem, not this year, not with this army. The destination dissolved somewhere back at the Lido, in a debt nobody planned for. And nobody in that fleet ever quite noticed the moment it happened, because no single moment was the moment. Each step only looks unforgivable from the outside. Looking back, from the inside, every single one of them felt like the reasonable option at the time. Historians still argue about how much of this was Venetian scheming and how much was simple accident, drift, and desperation. The honest answer is probably both, tangled together in a way no single villain can fully explain. There's a pattern here that isn't unique to the year 1204. Look at any institution that drifts far from its founding purpose. A company, a government program, even a war. And you'll usually find the same shape underneath it. Not one betrayal. A string of debts and shortcuts, each one small enough to justify. Until the sum of them becomes something nobody would have agreed to at the start. That is what happened to the Fourth Crusade, and it's why, 9 centuries later, people are still trying to pinpoint the exact moment everything went wrong, when the honest answer is that there wasn't one. So what actually happened here? First, the truth about the crusade itself. Nobody woke up one morning and decided to destroy Constantinople. The Fourth Crusade lost its way, one solvable seeming problem at a time, a shipping contract too large for the army that showed up, a debt that needed paying, a prince with a convincing story, a coup that erased the only agreement holding the whole arrangement together. Second, the part that reaches past the year 1204. Watch what happens when a group under pressure keeps choosing the option that solves today's problem without asking where it leads tomorrow. Zara felt necessary. Alexios's offer felt like salvation. Even the final assault felt, to the men doing it, like the only option left on the table. Small, reasonable steps can add up to a destination nobody would have chosen on day one. Third, and this is the part that stays with me, Constantinople was recaptured by the Byzantines in 1261, decades after the sack. But the empire that came back was smaller, poorer, and permanently weaker than the one that fell. It survived for almost 200 more years, limping along a fraction of its former size, until the Ottomans finally took the city for good in 1453. Historians still trace a direct line from the wounds of 1204 to the empire's final collapse. The Crusaders didn't just interrupt Byzantium's history. They may have ended it early. So here's the question I'd genuinely like to know your answer to. Out of everything in this chain, the Venetian contract, Zara, Alexios's promise, the coup, which single decision do you think was the real point of no return? Tell me below, because I don't think there's one obvious answer, and I want to hear which one convinced you. Somewhere behind an army that never got there, Jerusalem is still waiting. It was waiting in 1204. In some sense, it's still waiting now.